region that does not innovate at all. The level of research and development spending is minute. It's, I think, 0.5% of the size of the economy. So it's about 1/4 of what it is in China. And what's the result of that? Well, I was reading the other day a very interesting statistic. The number of patents that are registered every year in Brazil is only 600. And you know how many there are in South Korea? 80,000. And it's a tiny country compared to Brazil. And yet this stranglehold on the innovative processes of the economy in Brazil makes room for very little innovation. And again, to go back to the issue I mentioned a while ago, social spending. I mean, we put a lot of emphasis in Latin America from a political point of view on social spending, but if you look at social spending, it's generally a process whereby people who don't need that money are benefiting from it. And clearly, when you distract resources and channel them toward people who don't need them, you're going to eventually create a big sort of dead weight that's going to gravitate on those who would need to be in a position to generate enterprises and businesses and just foster development in general. So I think these are some of the reforms that we need to undertake very soon. The consequences of not undertaking many of these reforms are I think, very important. And they're not only economic, of course they're economic. If you compare per capita income in Latin America today with what it was in the 1960s, we're not doing all that well. Per capita income in Latin America in 1960 was about 1/4 of what it was in the United States. Today it's about 1/6. So clearly the trend is not great. But I'm talking about the consequences for the political system. And I think this is really important. The consequences for this cultural struggle about which I was talking at the beginning. Because if we don't generate conditions of development soon, what's going to happen is, of course, those who are struggling to prevent Latin America from playing a full role in today's global economy and being a member of the big family of liberal democracies are going to find themselves strengthened. And our political institutions are going to be further weakened. And I think that will place Latin America's liberal democracy in a very weak position. It's clearly, I'm talking about Mexico, and I'm talking about Peru, and I'm talking about many other countries that in the last few years seem to be doing things better and seem to be headed in the right direction. In those countries, there are forces at work trying to stop the trend towards strong liberal democracies under a market economy. And I think that if we don't undertake some very meaningful reforms that give a critical mass of people reasons to turn a deaf ear to the siren song of populism, we will see a strengthening of some of these populist authoritarian currents and trends in Latin America. So I think what's at stake is extremely important. Having said that, I don't want to sound pessimistic. I mean, again, clearly many countries are headed in the right direction, even if some of these reforms are still pending. And the environment today is one that is helping foster a new phenomenon. And I would think, I mean, among the different things that are happening, perhaps the most encouraging one is the growth of the middle class. I mean, that's really what was lacking historically in Latin America. As we all know, these huge disparities between the rich and the poor were not only ethically very challenging for anyone with a modicum of ethics, but also politically very challenging for liberal democracy. It was very difficult for institutions to solidify and become stable and predictable in an environment in which so many people had reasons to mistrust the political process. So all of that is at stake, and I think it's very important that we give people reasons to believe that the liberal democratic system and the market economy are to their benefit. Let me, in closing, say a few words about the United States and Latin America. Because I think the United States, well, first of all, I mean, what happens in Latin America is really for Latin Americans to decide, and I've never been of the view that Latin America's problem are something that we need to blame on anyone else. And that has been a huge source of misperception in Latin America. Many people believe, or until recently believed, that the reason for our underdevelopment was exploitation from overseas. We've had a share of exploitation, clearly. That's what happened in colonial times and even in Republican time. But Latin Americans are to blame for Latin America's underdevelopment. Having said that, I think the United States could play a much more active role in the development of Latin America, and I think it would be to the benefit of the United States. And unfortunately, what we've seen in recent years, and it doesn't look like it's going to change, is a certain disengagement from the region on the part of the United States. It's as if it didn't really care too much. I mean, one can understand, of course, why the United States is preoccupied with other parts of the world. Clearly, the security issues after 9/11 were paramount, and I mean, one would have to be a fool not to understand that. Clearly, what is happening in Asia is going to be a lot of attention is going to be focused on that from Washington and from decision makers in the United States. But even so, I think this is a big enough country that it can handle all these things at once and continue to engage Latin America in a much more meaningful way, and it hasn't happened. Historically, the relationship between the United States and Latin America has kind of oscillated between, I guess, hegemony. I'm talking about the Monroe Doctrine and the Platt Amendment, and all of you historians in the room will know about this. And sort of condescension, the idea that foreign aid and help from overseas was really the way to cement a strong relationship and to foster development. So you had the Alliance for Progress and of course the Good Neighbor policy and those kinds of policies. So we kind of oscillated between one and the other. But in recent decades, we saw the emergence of a new vision, one that wanted to engage Latin America in many other ways on a sort of equal footing, and one way to do that was the notion that we should create a huge free trade area across the hemisphere. As you know, that was frustrated 5 years ago, I think, because a few countries in Latin America opposed the idea, even though most countries in Latin America were in favor of it. And after that, I think the United States simply lost all interest. And this is wrong. Trade between the United States and Latin America is not very sizable. It amounts to about $650 billion. It's really small compared to its potential. If you think that 75% of European trade takes place among European countries, and that most of China's trade takes place in Asia, even though a lot of people in this hemisphere complain about Chinese trade, the bulk of it is taking place within Asia. If you think about that, then clearly the United States should be engaged in Latin America a lot more. This is the natural area for the United States in which to enhance its trading relationship with the region. And the reasons for not doing so, I think, are entirely demagogic and they're misplaced. As you know, there's still many free trade agreements pending for ratification in Congress, one with Colombia, another one with Panama, another one with South Korea. A lot of voices emerged in recent years in this country, warning against signing new free trade agreements or engaging other countries in any form of free trade. And if you look at the relationship between the United States and some of its partners with which it has signed free trade agreements, I mean, not only is there no reason to fear anything, if anything, it's actually worked the other way around. There is a surplus in favor of the United States with at least 17 partners with which it has free trade agreements. Unfortunately, however, these voices have prevailed and they have kind of paralyzed the Congress, and so many of these treaties have not been ratified with Latin America. In general, we've seen a move away from further enhancing these commercial relations. In terms of investment, I mean, there continues to be significant investment. I think the total amount of investment is about $400 billion, which is not insignificant. I mean, U.S. investment in Latin America. But again, this is way below the potential if you compare it to what's happening in Asia and in Europe and other parts of the world. I also think that this disengagement on the part of the United States has had an effect in Latin America in terms of strengthening the position of the carnivores, if I may use that term again. We see that, for instance, at the OAS, the Organization of American States, to mention one of the many multilateral bodies that deal with the hemisphere as a whole. That body has been severely weakened. It's become very ineffective every time in the recent years in which there's been a challenge to liberal democracy. That organization has been entirely powerless. It's completely toothless. It's paralyzed by its internal conflicts and contradictions, and there's been a total lack of leadership. And I think that U.S. disengagement from the region has been a problem. Another issue has been, well, what tends to happen when you disengage at the top level is that the bureaucracy takes over. So people who now control policy toward Latin America are bureaucrats who would not be in a position to lead were it not for the fact that there's this leadership vacuum at the top. So what tends to happen when bureaucrats take over from the leaders is that issues that should not be playing a huge role come to the forefront. And so what we've seen in recent years is what I like to call the narcotization of policy toward Latin America. This big obsession with narcotics and security is the overriding issue in terms of the relationship with Latin America. Not only has it not been effective, I mean, it really has not been very effective, but it also has alienated many in Latin America, because clearly what that says about the United States is that it sees Latin America essentially as a source of problems, and not as a potential for mutually beneficial relationships, but essentially as a source of problems. And that has given anti-Americanism in Latin America, which is not as big as it used to be, but it still exists. It has strengthened those voices, and I think that's another consequence of this gradual disengagement from the region. So I would hope that in the next few years we will see the United States play a much bigger role. I think it's very naive to think, as some of the policymakers seem to think, that a country such as Brazil will be playing that kind of leadership role in the region. I mean, again, if we take into account the context right now, this big cultural struggle between modernizers and retrograde, Brazil is not taking a leadership role. Brazil is domestically doing a lot of things right, but in terms of foreign policy, because it has its own goals, and it has this complex vis-a-vis the United States, and it sees itself as a sort of counterweight to the United States in the region, it has been tempted to establish these sorts of alliances with all these unsavory regimes, such as Venezuela and Iran and all these others. So clearly that is not helping the cause of the modernizers and the forces that work in favor of liberal democracy and the market economy. So I think that we're missing a greater leadership role on the part of the United States, which does not mean a hegemonic role. It doesn't mean that the United States needs to come into Latin America and dictate matters. I'm talking about something entirely different. I'm talking about engaging Latin America in the way that some of the European countries are engaging each other, and of course in the way that Asians are engaging each other. So perhaps I've talked more than enough, but I'll be very happy, of course, to answer some questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Due to time constraints, we won't have time for questions because the mariachi band is already outside. Wow. So we will, Mr. Vargas Llosa will hang out during the reception, so if you have some specific questions that you want to talk to him, he'll be happy, I'm sure, to talk to you about it. Also remember that we have at the bookstore a couple of copies of his books, so he'll be around for signing books too. And we just have a little present from Reverend to thank you for taking your time and being here with us. And thank you so much.
Thank you, very kind.